Unfortunately, most people would see Mike, Mac, and in particular myself as elite rich murderers, no better and possibly worse than the poachers themselves, and that we take pride in the killing of so-called endangered species in Africa. Close to 40 pounds, I would say, hey? Well done.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, for the majority of people, their conclusions on hunters are based on an uneducated and an emotional decision, not based on any scientific facts. Very simply put, if animals do not have a commercial value, and if hunting was stopped, they would be poached out within a few years, as we've seen in Kenya. Luckily though, animals can be replaced to depleted areas at a huge cost, but the land still needs to support the animals, and here is the greatest threat to wildlife, more so than even the poaching epidemic hitting Africa today. If hunting was to be stopped, the local villages would soon turn those huge animal supporting areas into maize fields, which in no time at all would become infertile wastelands. And when this happens, there is no future for wildlife. The left is Chirisa Safari Area, and the right is the adjacent communal land. One also has to remember that when national parks set aside areas for wildlife in the early 1960s, it was done after a lot of careful consideration and research. Firstly, they had to be areas that were not deemed suitable for farming or cattle ranching. This resulted in areas that had low or erratic rainfalls and often had the dreaded tsetse fly that transmitted sleeping sickness. Once they had identified these areas, they were then split into either national parks or hunting areas accordingly. The more beautiful areas that had good carrying capacity of game were declared national parks, while other areas that were considered marginal or unviable from a photographical point of view were turned into hunting areas. These hunting areas are huge and form an important buffer zone to the national parks, as well as more than doubling the wildlife supporting areas. However, as in the Dandy, they simply would never be able to be turned into a photographic area, even if they had amazing game numbers like the national parks, for the simple reason that vast areas are covered by almost impenetrable jess blocks and boring mopani forests that would make rewarding game viewing impossible. Likewise, these areas are often inhabited by the stinging tsetse flies and at times clouds of mopani flies that make life miserable. Hunting is the only way these areas can generate an income and at the same time preserve the bush in its natural state. Unfortunately, to add to our woes, the US Fish and Wildlife has, with all likely good intentions, made a misguided decision to ban the importation by Americans of ivory and lion products obtained by legally sport-hunted elephants in Zimbabwe and Tanzania. It is misguided because it seriously hampers our efforts to conserve not only those species, but the numerous other species that are poached. The same year that the ban came into place, our gross sales dropped by nearly $142,000 compared to 2013. This directly affected our ability to operate DAPU, our Dandy anti-poaching unit, and as a result, we can see that there was an increase in elephants poached.
We smelled something dead and saw lots of vultures. So had to be an elephant. Yeah, looks like a young bull. Poacher's job. Tusk's gone. Another loss.
By the table, you can see that since we started DAPU, which is funded by sport hunters and ourselves, we have had remarkable results. In 2010, we had 40 poached elephants, while in 2013, before the ban came into place, we only had 4 poached elephants. The ban and the resultant loss of income not only affects CMS and DAPO, but also directly affects our national parks, as well as, and most importantly, the local communities who benefit directly not only from the finances generated by hunters, but as well as the proteins provided by sport-hunted elephants. If we take the benefits of one of the elephants that either Mike or Mac shot and compare it to one poached elephant, which in essence will happen in the not too distant future with bad policies like the US Fish and Wildlife ban and the increasing pressure from anti-hunters, it makes for interesting facts. CMS receives a total revenue of $27,401.20, while a poacher's total is a mere $300. Of that revenue, CMS pays council, they cover the community projects, etc. Ward 4, who are the communities living closest to where the elephant was shot. The Campfire Project, who is responsible for rural development. National Parks tariffs, professional hunters services, trackers, and food and catering. A poacher has none of the above expenses. For the hunt to be successful, CMS directly employs or supports the following people, making a grand total of 126 people, while poachers only use themselves and possibly a porter. A very important part of the hunt is the meat delivery to the protein-starved communities. Approximately 2,000 pounds of meat benefit more than 250 people, while the poachers will carry only enough for themselves. In summary, a poached elephant generates 1% of the revenue of that of a sport-hunted elephant. A poached elephant employs 2% of the people that a sport-hunted elephant does. A poached elephant feeds 1% of that of a sport-hunted elephant. And a poached elephant contributes less than 1% direct payments to the communities that a sport-hunted elephant does. One has to remember that the hunting quotas, which every year is well researched and documented in Zimbabwe, equate to 2% of the overall population of the species. The taking off of 2% of the elephant population has no adverse effects at all on the country's elephant numbers, as the elephant's average birth rate is 21% annually. The issue with elephant numbers that we see decreasing in many African countries is solely due to poaching and increased population, not hunting. Zimbabwe, while having issues with poaching, especially in the Zambezi Valley, still has a slight increase in elephant numbers overall. And in some cases, such as the northwestern region, they are now heavily overpopulated. This is due singly to the fact that we hunt elephant. While hunting will never be able to be used as a tool to decrease elephant numbers, simply because the quotas are so conservative, it is essential as the finance generated from these hunts supports ours and national parks' anti-poaching operations. If sport hunting is closed, then not only are the elephants doomed, but so are all other species and their habitats in these beautiful hunting areas that we are fortunate enough to be part of, whether it's as a sport hunter or an operator. The destruction is permanent. And that is an educated opinion.